Hi, today we're going to talk about the first principle of design, which is balance. I know people sometimes have a little bit of trouble understanding this, in particular in regards to asymmetrical balance. So we're going to try to break it down today, and hopefully it'll be a little more clear. So we learned in this week's chapter that there are three main types of balance. There's symmetrical, which can be broken down into bilateral and absolute symmetry. And absolute symmetry is when it is like almost perfectly symmetrical. And then bilateral symmetry, where it's symmetrical, but there are some discrepancies. Then there's asymmetrical balance and radial balance. Balance in art, this relates to the visual distribution of weight in terms of the basic formal elements. But that just sounds like womp, 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 womp. So what does that really mean? So when you think of balance, think of a seesaw. So I have a little seesaw right here, and here's like a big heavy brown ball. And then here's some smaller objects that when placed on there counterbalance it so that the balance is equal. So when we talk about symmetrical balance, it's easier to figure out that distribution of visual weight because it's more or less visually equal on either side of the image, and it's easier for you to look at and figure out. So like if I picked the most obvious example because it already looks like they're on a seesaw, but like this seesaw is equally balanced. There's an elephant here, there's an elephant here. There's a pillar here, there's a pillar here. There's trees here, there's trees here. There's two ladies here, and a lady in the middle. So it's like, this is like pretty much equally balanced in terms of weight. But I'm going to point this out later that when we speak of balance, we have to also not only say, oh, look, there's two elephants. We also have to bring in the basic formal elements of art. So like here are two elephants. They're both gray, and these grays are of equal value when you're talking about in terms of contrast. They're equally the same degree of light. And then there's areas that are equally the same degree of dark. Or look, there's two implied lines, one on either side. So we have to discuss it in those kind of terms as well. So when we talk about radial balance, it's easy to figure out too, because generally you can divide it down the middle either way, and you can see that the visual distribution of weight on this side, on the right, is equal to that on the left. There's an equal amount of turquoise on this side and an equal amount of turquoise on this side, and an equal, like there's half of the square on this side, half of the square on that side. So it's like really pretty easy to figure out the visual weight for both radial balance in most cases and for symmetrical balance, because sometimes radial balance will not be exactly symmetrical like this is, but there's still some central point where things radiate off of it. So let's talk about this in terms of asymmetrical balance, because it's harder to determine. But again, if we think of it in terms of a seesaw and the balance of weight on a seesaw, it becomes a little bit easier. So weight distribution, visual weight distribution, this is considered in terms of how heavy or how light a basic formal element appears to the mind and eye. So when we think about that, like darker values, like this brown and black that this woman is wearing, those browns, blacks, dark blues, purples, those are thought to be heavier in weight than colors that are lighter in value, such as like this scarlet here and this reddish brown here, they are kind of medium tones, medium to slightly darker tones, but there are much more relatively very light values on this side. So the darker values on the right are considered to be heavier than these lighter values on the left. So larger shapes are heavier than smaller shapes. Hues, like pure saturated hues, are especially those that are like red and orange and yellow. Those are really intense. Blues, dark greens, those aren't as intense, but the ones that are really bright, that come off the color wheel, those are heavier than tints, tones, and shades. So let's look at this image here. So the woman on the right, and I'm going to speak of this in terms of the basic formal elements, she is a larger shape than each individual child. She is dressed in black and brown. This larger shape of the woman and the fact that she's dressed in black and brown make this right side visually heavy. So on the if we only had, like, let me zoom up to the next one. If we only had one of these kids over here on the left, and then we had this big, heavy black and brown figure of the woman on the right, this scale would not be balanced. It would be too heavy on this right side for that one child. So we have to have there's 4 kids, but I'm drawn in 3. We have to have all of those shapes to counterbalance this larger shape. So not only are these shapes lighter, so that means we have to have more of them. They're also smaller, so that means we have to have more of them to counterbalance this heavy shape on this other side. Now, for example, if this woman was tiny and smaller, and we had this many kids on this side, then suddenly she would be up in the air. And so maybe we would need less kids on this other side to balance her out. So I mentioned this. So in order for this to be balanced, we have to have this larger, darker shape of the woman on the right. It has to be counterbalanced by more of the smaller shapes, lighter value tint, tones, and shades of the children. Well, let's look at another picture. So why is this image considered to be asymmetrically balanced and not unbalanced? This is by Degas. So first we're going to divide it in half so we can get a better understanding of how the visual weight's distributed. So it looks like we have a lot of girls, ballerinas on this right side, and only one sad ballerina on the left side. But on the left side, we also have this big, large, darker band, this wainscoting or whatever along the wall. And we have just a little small, darker color band on the right side. So on the right side, we have many girls in muted tints, tones, and shades of color. So most of these colors over here are muted. They're either been mixed with white or black, or in some cases browns. Like, so these colors are muted with the exception of this one little bit of orange here. And then on the left side, we have these muted colors, but we also have those like big, large, brown, heavy bands of wainscoting. Then we have the girl, her tutu is less muted because it's getting more light than the ones on the right. And she's also wearing a shirt that is it's a saturated shirt. It's red. It's from the color wheel. So that's a really intense color right there. So as you recall, darker values are heavier than the muted, like bluish skirts of the girls on the right. So that's one way that's balanced. And then solid colors, which I didn't mention before, are heavier than textured areas, because the textured areas will have like different colors that create the textures. And then a solid color is just a solid color. So those are there are more textured colors on the right. And even though there's textured colors on the left, there's more solid colors with the brown and with a heavily saturated hue of red. So then again, saturated hues are heavier. So that's on the girl on the right. And then there's only a tiny bit of orange. I'm sorry, there's this hues on the left, and there's only a tiny bit of orange on the right. So now what I want you to do is I want you to put your hand over this orange. And if you cover up that orange on the right, suddenly, even though it's just a small thing, suddenly the painting feels heavy on the left. This might take you a while to get used to seeing this. So if we just had this, if we had no saturated hues at all on the right side, then suddenly, especially since this is a saturated red, it could be a saturated orange over here, it could be a saturated red orange over here, or a yellow, because yellow is not quite as heavy. But so if we just had this red over here and none of this orange over here, suddenly it would be heavy on the left side. So we need that tiny bit of orange over there to counterbalance this, because that little bit of orange, one thing it counterbalances in terms of weight, just that little bit, but also it counterbalances it in that we don't get stuck looking at this red all the time, because that orange over there is equally intense, and it kind of pulls our eye back and forth over the image. So I hope that helps some. I know that balance, especially asymmetrical balance, is really hard to get used to, and you have to start looking and looking and looking at things. And the more you look and the more you think about what we've been talking about, the more it's going to make sense for you. Alrighty, thank you and have a great day.